And now Clark creates a deal. Clark considered coming up from 3. I'll lay it in and dip inside. What was supposed to be a memorable week for Caitlin Clark in her hometown of Indianapolis unexpectedly became a major issue for the WNBA. Despite the city's celebration of her with an advertisement, many seats were vacant and fans were upset. So many boycotted the All-Star game in protest. So, how did Caitlin Clark's injury and absence alter everything? And how did the league allow things to go so wrong? Come explore the surprising boycott of the WNBA All-Star Game with us. The WNBA boycott. Indianapolis had prepared for what was expected to be a historic WNBA weekend for months. Excitement had been in the air across the entire city. A life-size model of the All-Star basketball court was displayed to passengers at the airport. An audacious welcome that demonstrated the city's seriousness about the occasion. Local stores were overflowing with merchandise. Everyone was anticipating record-breaking crowds to fill every seat and flood the streets, so restaurants hired more staff. Tickets vanished in a matter of hours after going on sale. Prices increased rapidly. The most affordable ones began at $121, while the average resale price was $262. Seats by the court were selling for thousands of dollars. TickPick claims that this was the most costly WNBA All-Star game ever. One name, Caitlin Clark, was at the heart of it all. The main attraction was her. Thousands of devoted fans crowded inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse, along with her family and friends, had been anticipating her lighting up the floor in her home state. It was anticipated that her mere presence would create a loud sea of enthusiasm around the arena. This was supposed to be her celebration and her moment, but everything went wrong. On that day, supporters discovered via social media and sports publications that Caitlin Clark would not be competing due to a groin injury. The response was harsh and swift. After months of building, the buzz vanished in a matter of minutes. The cost of tickets dropped precipitously. In a matter of hours, the average selling price of $262 fell to only $64 instead. That's a huge 75% drop. The ticket vendors were in a panic. Many had purchased tickets with the intention of selling them for a profit. However, they were suddenly drastically cutting rates in an attempt to get even a little portion of their money back. From $121 to $100, then to $80, $70, and finally to $64. However, there were still no purchasers to be identified. The city had lost all of the energy that had once been there. Fans delivered a loud, straightforward, and devastating message. No game, no Caitlin. Not only were people dissatisfied, they left. To see her perform, some people had flown in or reserved pricey hotel rooms. However, many canceled their plans, packed their bags, and departed as soon as the news leaked. They didn't give a damn without Clark. The incident was no longer significant. This decline in interest wasn't slight. The WNBA could no longer ignore it. It was a complete collapse, a live public unraveling of what had been a perfect weekend. The league was demonstrating in the most convincing manner how much Caitlin Clark contributed to its success. Furthermore, this wasn't the first instance. The cost of tickets had already significantly increased when she had a quad injury in May, missing a few regular season games. For instance, tickets for the highly anticipated Chicago game fell by 71%, and prices for the Washington game fell by 47%. However, those were only typical season games. The issues didn't end at the arena's entrance. The local economy as a whole suffered. Every Indiana Fever home game had sold out for almost 2 years. However, the stands were abruptly packed with vacant seats during what was meant to be the most thrilling basketball weekend the city had hosted since the NBA All-Star Game. Companies that had spent thousands on merchandise with an all-star theme were now looking at shelves piled high with unsold items. Previously completely booked hotels were suddenly experiencing cancellations. Restaurants that had prepared for large customers found themselves overstaffed and with empty tables. The atmosphere in downtown Indianapolis changed from one of celebration to one of disappointment. The enthusiasm and money flow just vanished without Clark, who had been the main attraction. There would be fewer patrons at the arena's good stands if there were fewer fans. Bars and haunted houses nearby that had anticipated a rush of patrons were abruptly silent. Basketball was no longer the only topic of discussion. It served as a warning to the league. Caitlin Clark was more than just a celebrity. She was the main force behind a new generation of fans, unprecedented attendance, and enormous viewership. Ticket prices don't plummet like this when other well-known players miss games. However, Clark's absence completely flipped the situation. The market has made its message quite clear. This all-star game lost its appeal without her. It revealed a harsh reality that the league had evaded. That one person was largely responsible for this historic season, complete with sold-out games and sensational headlines. All of the excitement seemed brittle without her. The fact that this was only the second time in WNBA history that a breakout talent was the main focus of the all-talent game made it even more depressing. These gatherings used to frequently feel more like formalities, with great musicians present, but without the charismatic appeal of a well-known name. Furthermore, this injury wasn't unexpected. Months of fierce, occasionally violent games led to it. Clark had often been struck by opponents, shoved, grabbed, and knocked down, frequently without the officials calling. The physical cost mounted. Too much had been done to her body, and it was just no longer able to hold up by the time All-Star Weekend arrived. How, then, did an All-Star game go place in Clark's home state of Indiana without Caitlin Clark playing? Did she receive fair treatment? Let's investigate. Clark's hardships and unfair treatment. It all started when Caitlin Clark was just beginning her rookie season the previous season. She became a lightning rod for rough, excessively violent play almost immediately. It's unbelievable to think that she received 20% of all the WNBA's flagrant foul calls that season. And the Chicago Sky and Angel Reese were largely responsible for that. These weren't merely tough fouls in basketball. These were intentional, discipline-based strikes that extended beyond the game. The mindset that underpinned it was what made it even more unsettling. Not all of the players were fouling Clark. After that, they were making fun of what was essentially a physical assault on the court while laughing in her face. This type of persistent mistreatment would land someone in jail in any other occupation. However, Caitlin Clark was supposed to accept it and continue on in the WNBA. Stephanie White, her coach, was aware of what was going on. Early on, she noticed the warning signs. White saw how the referees tolerated a degree of violence toward Clark that no other player had to endure as soon as she joined the Indiana Fever. Throughout the season, she often voiced her disapproval of the authorities' blatantly unfair treatment of her star guard. She wasn't exaggerating either. Clark was being thrashed on the court in game after game, while the officials did nothing but watch. This was something Coach White had already gone through before taking on Clark as her coach. When she was working against her, she witnessed it occur. Now that she was coaching Clark, she watched her take hit after hit while the referees paid no attention. White acknowledged that she had no idea why Clark was receiving this treatment. However, it was clear that the league had no intention of halting it. Since the officials were not offering any assistance, she and the Fever coaching staff had to focus on assisting Clark adapt and try to use the physical play to their advantage. This wasn't only Clark's issue. It was a reflection of a much larger league-wide problem. The WNBA's aggressiveness had gotten so bad that the Washington Post had taken notice. They blasted the awful refereeing, which had caused far too many games to devolve into ugly altercations. They even mockingly proposed that the league switch to a bruise as its new logo and use the phrase "no call." It wasn't a joke. What fans were witnessing night after night was reflected in that. The amount of video evidence is enormous. Without any whistles, falls, or other incidents, defenders were snatching Clark's arms, pushing her off screens, and smashing into her on drives. The refs did nothing but watch it happen. And it turned into a tactic when players realized that Clark could be targeted with no repercussions. Teams began using her as a tackling dummy since they knew they wouldn't face consequences. Additionally, Caitlin Clark was the only one who took those hits last year. However, since joining the Indiana Fever this season, Sophie Cunningham has been the second most targeted player in terms of egregious fouls. Aaliyah Boston and Clark are the only ones who have taken more. Sophie has also been beaten, which has made people even more aware of the league's erratic and nearly negligent handling of fouls. Referees who overlook violent contact between Indiana Fever players are often willing to call soft infractions when the Fever are defending. A slight alteration here, a minor